Have you ever gotten a gift where after you opened it and kind of processed it and realized what it was and sort of just see the whole scope of the story of the gift, you realized that it was really kind of a gift for the person who gave it rather than a gift for you? Have you ever gotten a gift like that? Yes. There may or may not be some knowing glances being exchanged. May or may not. You know, it's funny. It's like you see this happen at kids' birthday parties. The kids are all opening the presents. And of course, there's like the one kid, like little kids in particular, who are like, they're trying to pretend it's their birthday by like trying to help. Let me help open the presents. Hilarious. But then there's like the one gift that like the birthday child opens. And the kid who's giving the gift runs up and is like, this is so cool, you should get it, da, da, da. And it's like, wow, I got this for you, whatever. And let's open it. And now let's open it. And let's use it. And let's play with it right now. And all of a sudden the story comes rushing in and we're like, oh yeah, you were at the store or ordering something online and you're like, I want to play with that at that kid's birthday party. And so I'm going to get them that gift and then we're going to open it and play with it. And so the gift is really for me. This happens with children. It may or may not also happen with adults. You maybe have received a gift like this. You were surprised with a trip that your significant other was taking you on to this place that you know they've always wanted to go to. Wonderful. It's still great to go, but it was a kind of a gift for you through a gift to me. Or some new clothes of the way you wished I dressed instead of the way I actually do. A gift for you. Kind of blessed by it, but a gift for you through me. This is so interesting, isn't it? Like all the ways in which we do this. Of course, other people maybe have done this to us, but we do this to other people. And if we really began to think with some depth about the sorts of gifts that we give other people, or just the sorts of things that we're pursuing in relationship to people generally in our lives, we would be able to give really, if we were really to look, some really clear and specific accounts of the way in which the things that we look like we're doing for other people really have some way in them in which they're kind of for me at the end of the day. It might be some long and winding road, and yet the road sort of ends up with something that is benefiting me. And the issue here is that gifts are signs of love. Gifts are major signs of the way that we love. And so our gift giving is mixed with, okay, I'll give you this thing, but I'm kind of hoping to get something out of it along the way. It's maybe a sign of the way in which we love in the same way. Do we really ever actually love somebody else for their own sake? Let me ask you this. Have you ever loved anyone for their own sake without any respect or regard for what you are going to get as a result of the love that you're giving them? Have we ever actually loved anyone else purely or truly without any thought for me and what I'm getting as a result of this love? How do we actually love other people? How do we love other people truly in a way where I'm not just loving myself in and through my love for them? How do we actually love truly another person? And what does loving God have to do with loving other people? These are the questions we're going to be asking today. We're in the middle of a sermon series titled Falling in Love with God. Falling in love with God. We're in the middle of a sermon series titled Falling in Love with God. And we've been asking God to warm our hearts through His spiritual power into a living, burning hearth of love for God in our hearts. And we've been looking at a number of different elements of that in the course of the sermon series. We've looked at a lot of the why questions about why we should love God. And over the past few weeks, we've turned our attention to different how questions. How do we express our love for God? And this week, we're going to be looking at how we love God in and through the way we love other people. I've titled today's sermon, Love God by Loving Other People. Our scripture today is going to be Matthew chapter 22, verses 34 to 40. I'd encourage you to go there in a device or a Bible. I'm recognizing in real time that I forgot to look at the page in the service Bible, so I'm sorry about that if you have a service Bible. It's higher than page 288, because last week we're in the Psalms and it was page 288. So it's got to be past that. It's something. Matthew 22, verses 34 to 40. I will read the text aloud. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Everybody loves the idea of loving other people. The idea of loving other people is very, very in vogue today. Everyone loves the idea of loving other people. If you were to meet someone who didn't love the idea of loving other people, you would think immediately that they are odd or strange or dangerous. Everyone today loves the idea of loving other people. We love to talk about loving people who are close to us. We want to love people. We don't want to judge people. We want to affirm people. And so we love, and people who are in close relational proximity to us are just people close to us, like in that sort of second sphere. People are just around our lives. We want to love them. We want to love every single one of them. We also want to love people who are far away. We care about every single hurt and pain and challenge and tragedy that's happening around the world. We read about them when we go, I love those people. We should love those people. How can we help people who are suffering around the world? We have a huge scope in our minds today when we think about people that are deserving of love, and it's basically everybody. Everybody should be loved, and we want to love all people. And this really has taken on a sort of a status of like almost modern dogma. This is just like a belief that everybody has, and it's really beyond challenge. It feels weird to even challenge the idea that, oh my gosh, everybody should be loved. We're in church. We're like, I feel like that's like one of the central tenets. Everyone should be loved. It's loved by God. But just broader than that, socially, societally, it's like a doctrine. All people should be loved. To not believe this would mean that there's something strange about you. And so if someone were to confess that doctrine, oh yes, I love all people, everyone is deserving of love, there's a sense in which they may be actually confessing the content of that statement. There's a second sense in which they might be saying, I'm like in with everyone, because everyone here all the time agrees. We love the idea of loving other people. Everyone should be loved. Of course, we did not get here to this place societally by accident. We didn't just wake up one day and like got good morally, and now we like love everyone, and like we made all this moral progress. All those people back there were morally weak and evil and dumb, and we woke up in our time and just boom, poof, we are good. That's not how it happened. There's a story out there that sort of tells like a moral progressive story that we got to this idea that everyone should be loved through just, the progress of time. But that's not really what happened. In Western society, we got to loving the idea of loving other people because of two contributions that Christianity made to our society. The first Christian teaching is the biblical affirmation that all people are made in the image of God. And so people are ultimately worthy of equal worth and dignity, regardless of the weird randomness of social hierarchies that take place in this world, that's not actually true. What's actually true ultimately is that people are made in God's image. And so everyone has equal worth and equal value before the Lord and before one another, whether we're acknowledging it or not. And so people are deserving of love. That idea got into this culture, run through many thousands of years, leading to a time and to a place where people would go, that just is obvious that people are of equal dignity and worth. A second idea that got into this culture and time and place that has led us to just think instinctively that people are worthy of love are Jesus of Nazareth's teachings on love of the neighbor, the core of which are found in our text today. In Matthew 22:39, Jesus says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There are a number of things about this text that are very surprising. It may look familiar or commonplace to you, but again, that's because we sort of live in this time. We all just kind of agree people are worthy of love. I want to love my neighbor. But this text is actually very revolutionary, and it is incredibly surprising morally to look at it. In particular, these words neighbor and as yourself. Let's look at them for a second. The word neighbor, you will love your neighbor, is shocking and surprising. Because generally what people do in the world is they love those people who are close to them somehow through generally some sort of blood relation, a marital relationship, my family, my kids, my spouse, or like people who are of the same tribe somehow. And we love those people who are in some sort of in-group. But the neighbor is just there. The neighbor's not in the in-group. The neighbor might be in the in-group. It's, of course, more challenging and more poignant when the neighbor's not in the in-group. The neighbor is just there. Neighbor is a geographical word that ends up taking on a moral dimension because Jesus here is teaching those everyday people who are just around you, they're the people you should love. And that is shocking and revolutionary over the course of human history when we talk about how humans have decided who is worthy of love and who should be loved. The neighbor is a shocking person to decide who to love. This, of course, is what the parable of the Good Samaritan is about, right? You know this parable, Jesus, and someone comes up, Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells him a parable that's not about answering the question who my neighbor is. It's about telling the person, who are you going to be a neighbor to? It's your job to just be a neighbor to everyone that is around you. And so this just raises the bar incredibly high when we ask the question, who is deserving of my love? Jesus says, you're supposed to love your neighbor, that commonplace person who's just around you on the subway platform, on the street. You're doing church with them. You wouldn't have chosen them otherwise, but we're doing church together. We're neighbors. All these people, the person who's playing the music too loud, you hear them above, below, side, so whatever it is, all the screaming insanity of neighbors, these are the people that Jesus says, you will love them. There's a second thing about this teaching, however, that is very surprising. It's not just that you'll love your neighbor, it's that you'll love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus identifies a particular manner of the love that you will have for your neighbor. It is a love in the way that I would want to be loved. It is a love that exchanges places with my neighbor. I love my neighbor in me. I love them as myself. Instead of allowing them to remain out there or far away from me, I say, I have a sphere of this reality in which over which I am in control. I have a sphere of this reality over which I am in control, and it's me. It's this right here, and I will find a way to love you in the specificity of myself. I will, instead of leaving you over there, I will somehow bring you close and love, instead of loving me in the specificity of myself, I'll love you in the specificity of who I am. These are the two very, very surprising things that come out of this teaching that are not at all commonplace or simple. They are divine revelation from heaven about the nature of love if it were to descend into this fallen and sinful place. It would look like people who love their neighbor, just the everyday rando that's around, as though I'm loving myself in the specificity of me and who I am and how I want to be loved. This is the teaching that has become general Western doctrine, an idea that we love about loving other people. And it has produced all kinds of wonderful impulses in our society. This idea of neighbor love and this costly, incredibly elevated ethic of loving people generally has produced all of our impulses for social services and philanthropy and generosity. When conditions in cities, we have challenging conditions in our cities today, but when cities were first really getting off the ground and in an age of industrialization and urbanization, the conditions were just awful. They were awful for everybody. And all of the urban renewal impulses that came out of that in the United States came out of people who said, I should be loving my neighbor. All of these things came out of this. Our emotional response that we have to other people when we say, you're going through a hard time and somebody should just be there for you. All of those things come back to Jesus' one-verse teaching on loving our neighbor. And as a result, everybody loves the idea of loving other people. And as a result, everyone loves their neighbor. We love the idea of it, and so obviously, we're also doing it. Obviously, we also love putting it into practice. We love loving our neighbor. We're so good at it. We love doing it all the time. We love finding new ways in our lives to set down my own ego and my own desires and the things that I want, to love other people in greater and greater ways of more sacrifice and more specificity. We love the idea, and so we love the practice. Or not. Everyone doesn't actually love to love their neighbor. Everyone loves the idea of loving their neighbor, but most people really don't love actually loving their neighbor. Liking the idea of loving my neighbor is a very different thing than loving my actual frustrating, annoying neighbor. Those are just two very, very different things. Loving my actual neighbor is very difficult, and if we're honest, we really don't do it very well. And we really don't even like to do it. We love the idea of loving other people. We just don't actually love other people all that much. An idea is a lot easier to love than a person. Everyone loves the idea of loving people, but we actually love loving ourselves. We love the idea of loving other people, but in practice, we love loving me. And I'm really good at that. It comes so naturally to me. I've got a seemingly eternal source of desire to keep loving there is a kind of love that I'm good at practicing. It unfortunately is self-love. It's love for myself. And maybe, I don't know, you feel the same way when you reflect on the way in which you love other people versus the way you love yourself. Right? Jesus says, when he says you should love your neighbor as yourself, he's saying you're going to love another person in yourself. What we do instead, over and over and over again, is we find ways to love ourselves in other people. We see another person and have some sense that we should love them or be nice to them or get along with them or experience some camaraderie with them, something. And we take that impulse and then insert in it my love of myself. So that I go, I'm going to find a way to love me in you. We do the exact opposite thing that Jesus taught us to do. Jesus said, you're supposed to see the neighbor and go, I'm going to love you in me, when what we actually do is go, I'm going to love myself in you. You are going to become an extension of the ways in which I want to love myself. Other people become opportunities to love me more, which sounds so great. To love me more. Other people become opportunities for that. Even things sometimes that we do that are actually, they kind of are objectively nice or kind or good or productive. We just are polluting them all the time with this voice in the back of our heads and deep down in our hearts that goes, and I'm going to get something out of that. I'm going to love myself in the way I'm loving that person. We do this over and over and over again. Someone's financial means becomes an opportunity for me to get what I want. That's so great that you got a big tax return. I'm maybe hanging around with you now more than I was before you got it. I don't know, I just am. Maybe you'll get me dinner or something because you're just flush with cash. Cool. Other people's financial means become an opportunity for me to get the things that I'm looking for. Someone's power is an opportunity for me to get the job or the status that I want. And so we find ourselves gravitating towards and clinging towards people who we recognize are powerful people or influential people, because one day, really deep down, we're hoping that that influence is going to bounce my way and get me the thing that I want or put me in the place that I want to be. Someone's body is an opportunity for my attractions to be satisfied. And so we're just looking around the world going, who am I attracted to? Who am I not attracted to? Oh, interesting, I don't know. And then as we begin to pursue somebody, there's just a little, it's of course good and wonderful to recognize someone's beauty and want to celebrate that, but there's just a little bit of a challenging thing in there where we're like, this is really kind of about something that I want. And so I'm getting that thing that I want in your body. And the reality, of course, is that over time in every relationship, people's bodies are going to grow and change. At some day, The person who's pursuing someone solely for what they're finding in their body is going to be faced with the challenge that that's not there anymore. It's changed. And at some point, that person is going to be faced with the challenge of going, I was always loving myself in you. I wasn't actually loving you. Someone's winsome personality becomes an opportunity for me to feel accepted or affirmed, etc., 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 etc. We just have an endless imagination when it comes to dreaming up new ways of how my seeming love for you can actually be love for me. Someone's smallness is an opportunity for me to feel like a caring protector. Someone's bigness is an opportunity for me to feel cared for and protected. Over and over again, we don't love other people in and as ourselves. We're searching for ways to love ourselves in other people. And so we are not able to love other people. This erodes completely our ability to love other people in any way. We just simply cannot get out of our own way. There's almost a directional image that could be helpful here, right? Our love coming out of us and going to other people. It never comes out pure. It goes out for a second and then does some reconnaissance and then doubles back and comes back and loves me and then goes out a little bit. It's carrying something to myself. There's just never a pure directional move. The love that I have just going out to you without a doubling back in here or a circling around or a looking at what's going on in myself. And there's this impurity that comes up over and over again in the way that we love, and as a result in every single love relationship that we think we have. Do you want to love other people? Do you actually want to love other people? Do you want to love other people truly and without agenda and with purity of love? You should. You should want that. No one wants to be on their deathbed going, I realize now I've never actually loved anybody but myself. People get there. That happens. That's a path that you can walk, where you realize over time you never learned how to start loving someone now without loving me along the way, and you get to the end and go, I never loved somebody else for their own sake. You should want to avoid that conclusion in your life. You should want to not walk that path. And if you want to avoid that, and if you want to not walk that path, and if you want to say, I want to love somebody, God help me, for their own sake, truly and with endurance across time, I want that. If you want that, then you need to learn how to love anything for its own sake. And the good news is that you can learn how to do that. And you learn that by loving God. There are many, many, many reasons why it is right to love God. But for today, one of the most important reasons for you to love God, for you to learn how to love God, for you to love God actually and truly, for you to come into a real loving relationship with God, is that when you love God, the only way to love God is truly and with purity of love. And when you learn how to do that in relationship with God, you then know what real love and true love looks like, and you're able to give it to other people. Hi, baby. Hi. You see me? Hi. No matter where he is in here, you're all just going to look at him. Learning how to love someone other than yourself begins with learning how to love God. That's true. It's factual. Learning how to love someone without it being polluted by love for myself along the way begins with learning how to love the God of heaven and earth. Let's look again at Matthew 22, 34 to 40. In this context, Jesus is being approached by people who are bringing up for him a legal and religious dispute. Matthew 22:34-36 says this, "But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him, 'Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?'" So Jesus had already silenced, in a sort of scriptural debate, one other major first century Jewish group. And so when that happened, the Pharisees, another first century Jewish religious group, come together and they all gather together. The sense here is like, okay, those guys who are also kind of our enemies, Jesus just beat them. Now it's our turn. Let's gather together. Let's think of the best, most difficult question that we can ask Jesus to stump him. And that's the goal here. The goal is to sort of show Jesus to be a fraud or a charlatan or someone who really doesn't know the Bible. Oh, they don't really know the word. They're trying to show Jesus, to be a fraud, a religious joke. And so they come together and are like, what's one question that we can ask him that's going to get him? And of course, they send a lawyer over to ask it. There's an interesting text-critical issue here where it's really not sure if the lawyer was present in the original text. It's about a 50-50. Was the lawyer here? Wasn't the lawyer here? I feel like this is a really lawyerly thing to do, to sort of be like, I don't know, I may or may not have been there. I can neither confirm nor deny that I asked this question. We love lawyers. I'm just kidding. It's just a joke. We're not actually dragging anybody. They come and ask him, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" This is a really difficult question. There are over 600 commandments that are given to the Jews in the Old Testament. There's maybe a sense that already at this time that some of them are more important. I mean, you know of 10 of them called the 10 Commandments that ideally are kind of important, maybe more important. And yet everyone also sort of recognizes and has a sense that all the commandments are equally important. Like you don't set any commandment aside. And so Jesus is in a bit of a difficult, kind of a pickle here where he's like, we sort of recognize that there's some commandments that may be elevated. At the same time, all of the commandments are valid. So how's he going to respond in a way that sort of threads a needle through this difficult test? Jesus' reply has two major points that are of really critical significance for us today. The first thing that he does that is really innovative is, even though he is asked about what is the great commandment, singular, he responds in the plural. He says there are two great commandments. In Matthew 27:37-40, it reads this, "And he said to them, 'You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind.'" This is the great and first commandment. This is the Shema. We've seen it a couple times over the last few weeks. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. The Greek text also adds mind. Matthew here is missing strength for some reason. In other places, it also has the word strength in here. It's got all four. Jesus responds with this one. And there's a sense here in which Jesus is like playing the hits. He's like, it's the Shema. And there would have been like, yeah, okay, we all agree. Deuteronomy 6:4-5 is super important. Okay, we agree. It's the first greatest commandment. But he says something here. This is the great and first commandment, which is a little interesting. It lets us know that there's going to be a second, which again, he was only asked about which is the great commandment, not great commandments, but he says this is the first great commandment. Then he goes on, "And a second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus includes here a second great commandment and says in effect that there is two parts to the great commandment, or there are two great commandments that are inextricable from one another. You cannot talk about one side without talking about the other side. They're two sides of the same coin. You cannot speak about loving God without speaking about loving people. And you cannot speak about loving people without speaking in a prior sense about loving God. That's the first revolutionary thing that Jesus does here when he says, oh, great commandment, let me tell you about both of them. There are two, loving God and loving people. When Jesus says here, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, he's just quoting from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. Some of you might know that in the first instance, he's quoting the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4-5. But in the second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, he's also quoting the Old Testament. Right? That might be news to some of us who are sort of living with this idea in our minds that the God of the Old Testament is this angry jerk and the God of the New Testament is this nice, Santa Claus gift giver kind of guy. Jesus is quoting the Old Testament here in both places, Deuteronomy and Leviticus. Leviticus 19:18 says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." The God of the Old Testament is the same God as the God of the New Testament, and Jesus is saying here, the great commandment in two parts as it's articulated in the Hebrew scriptures are still authoritative together for us today. You shall love God and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But there is a second revolutionary thing that Jesus does here. Jesus' second major point is that there is an order to these commands. There's an order to these commandments. There is a firstness and a secondness to them. Furthermore, he goes on to say that all the other laws depend on and hang on, or are suspended by this inherent order. There's an order to loving God and loving people, and Jesus says, first, you love God. And then, second, you love people. There's a directional back and forth between these commandments. It is essentially to say that we cannot actually love other people unless we have first loved God. Similarly, if we say we love God but are not loving people, then we were never loving God to begin with. There is an order and a running back and forth between these two commandments that Jesus introduces. And Jesus then also says, all of the rest of the commands of the law hang on getting this order right of the dual nature of God's great command. To love God and as a result know how to love, and to have that issue forth naturally into love for other people. God must be loved first. Because until we've learned how to love God, we do not know how to love truly. When we think we're loving people without first loving God, we are doing our best approximation of love that never finds a way to get my own self-interest out of my loving. But when we love God, our love comes from me and passes directionally to God, and purified in its life in God, then comes down to our neighbor, full of a quality of divine love and not my own self-interest. God, in order to love God at all, and in order to love God truly, God must be loved for God's own sake. God is the great other. I cannot manipulate God. I can't control God. I can't make God run my life the way I want it to be run. When we come to God, we learn either immediately or very quickly that I cannot manipulate this love relationship into my own self-interest. Some of us come to God at first because we think God's gonna, give me a bunch of stuff. Or God's the thing that's been missing in my life. My life's not going the way that I want it to go, and I want to get these things. And if I just come to God, I'm going to begin to get it all. And there's like a sense in which we can come to God in that first way, in sort of an honest way, but we learn very quickly. God often teaches us very fast that God has no interest in being treated like a genie in our lives. And so very quickly in the life with God, we go, God, you are not like answering every single wish-granting prayer that I'm praying. I thought that's what following you was about. And God is like, you maybe didn't love me at all the first time around. God has to be loved for his own sake. He is the only being, when we come to him, we immediately or very quickly recognize you must be loved for your own sake. This process of coming to learn how to love God in that way, because anyone who's loved God for a long period of time knows I'm in love with God because God is God. right? That's why. If you've loved God for a long time, you know that's why you love God. You've had enough ups and downs. You've had some answered prayers. You've had a lot of unanswered ones. You are loving God because you've learned the gift and the good news of loving something for its own sake. And you learned that in God. And once you've learned that in God, you can take it and love other people with the same love. That's why you've got to love God first, because you've got to learn how to love another being for its own sake. And you learn that when you learn to love God. Then you take that love and you give it to other people. This is what we have to do. We need to learn how to love this way by coming to love God first and then trusting that that love is going to issue forth naturally into love for other people. Maybe in halting ways at first, but with increasing life and specificity and endurance over the course of our lives. And if you want to begin to learn this way of loving, if you want to begin to learn how to love God in this manner, if you want to begin to learn how to love a being for its own sake without any reference, letting go all of the ways that we hold on to self-love along the way, if you want to learn how to do that, you should follow Jesus, because Jesus is the one who teaches you how to do this. Because Jesus didn't just love the idea of loving God. Jesus didn't just love the idea of loving other people. Jesus loved loving God, and as a result, he loved loving other people. Jesus loved God. He longed for God. He spent time with God. He prayed with God. He just drank in God's word. He loved the scriptures. He loved God and loved God again and again and again. He loved God for God's own sake. Jesus' earthly life, his life in the flesh, was marked by all kinds of difficulties and disappointments. The author of Hebrews says that he walked with us in our flesh so that he could empathize with everything that you and I go through. All of the things that go wrong in your life or that are hard in your own life that make it hard for you to love God for God's own sake. Jesus endured those things as well, and yet he still loved loving God just because God is God and he loved God for that reason alone. That love taught him and grew in him an ability to love other people the same exact way. That's why we see in Jesus this obvious, exemplary, ethically exalted love of other people. It's not just because he was like a moral superhero or something. It's because his love for God created in him a power to love other people that you and I don't have, because we haven't yet begun to love God for God's own sake. But Jesus did. He loved God for God's own sake to such an extent that it led him to love people for their own sake, even when they were beating him and torturing him and murdering him. He took all of those things, all of those love impulses unto death at the cross. The ultimate sign of real love, of true love, because he loved us for our own sake, even when we were treating him incredibly poorly, even when it meant him giving up his very life. This is what happens in our lives in at first halting ways, yet in a growing way, when we decide to follow Jesus and believe in him and take on this order of this command. When we love God first and learn to love God for God's own sake, and then that becomes power in our lives to learn how to love people for their own sake, regardless of what we're getting, that same power and trajectory and direction of love becomes something that we are able to do. And then we become people who are approximating this great command. Loving God with everything we've got, loving people, loving our neighbor as ourselves. And when we love other people in that way, we show God and we show other people that we love God. That's one of the major ways that we show God that we love him, is by loving other people. And it's not just in like a like a gift sense. It's not like I love somebody else and it's like, here's the gift of my love and I give it to God. It's like we literally show him that love for God is living in us because we're now able to love other people in a way we were not previously able to. We show him, we demonstrate to God that we love him. And we should long to be able to show this to God and to say this to him. To say, God, not just here's this gift of love that I've given to this person and it's done unto you, but God, look at the quality of love that you've put in me for other people. That got there because I learned how to love you without condition and without limit and without want and without love of myself along the way. You should want to be able to give this gift to God. You should want to be able to show God, I love other people, and that shows that I love you first. We should want these things in our lives. And if you want these things, you learn from Jesus, who taught the commandment in this way, not because it was some idea out there that he thought was a good idea, or not even because he, in some clever moments of inspiration, found his way through the Pharisees' question. It's because it was a reality that was so obvious to him. He saw it. He lived it. He loved this reality, and so he just said it out of the power of love and nature that made him who he was. And when you believe in him and follow him in your life, you are saying, I want to love God in that way as well, and to have it become love for other people. So I'm not sitting at the end of my life going, I never actually loved anybody but me. So I'm not sitting at the end of a job or the end of a relationship or when I move away and I'm saying goodbye to a community, I look back and go, I loved all those people because of the things they did for me. I didn't love any of them for their own sake. That doesn't have to be who you are. It doesn't have to be your story. If you would say before God's Son, teach me how to love like you. Teach me how to love God in the way that you do. Teach me how to love my Heavenly Father without agenda so that it becomes in me power to love people without agenda. And when that happens, you will reach the various ends of your life with peace and courage to be able to stand before God saying, God, you love everyone without agenda. I approximated that. I loved one or two or three people without agenda. And when you see that, see how I loved you first. Amen.